Welcome back. On Friday night, we saw the dream of Arsenal hipsters everywhere realised. Gabriel Martinelli starting down the middle at centre-forward for, if not the first time in his career, certainly the first significant game at senior level for Arsenal or Brazil. A World Cup qualifier that Brazil lost 2-1 thanks to 2 late Luis Diaz goals. For many, it's the realisation of a long-term vision. There's been theory on the terraces, online, in print and online media for a long time that Gabby will eventually end up there. The feeling was, it's inevitable. But is it actually a long-term viable option? Are we seeing the beginning of something, or was it just necessity, with no Richarlison or Gabriel Jesus available for Fernando Diniz? Well, anyway, the project started strong. Cutting in from the left, Martinelli combines beautifully with Vini Jr. before sticking away his first senior goal for Brazil. And herein lies the case for why Martinelli at centre-forward might just work wonders. A number of qualities mark out Martinelli as a potential candidate for the position. First, he's a ruthless finisher, arguably the best in Arsenal's squad. Martinelli scored 15 goals from 9.3 XG last season, which is above a 50% over-performance. League-wide last season in the Premier League, when you look at the players who scored more goals than him, including penalties, Haaland scored 36 from 28.4 XG, Kane was 30 from 21.5, Tony was 20 from 18.7, Salah was 19 from 21.7, Wilson was 18 from 17.5, and Rashford was 17 from 15.4 XG, meaning Kane is the only one who comes close to Martinelli in terms of overperformance. It remains to be seen if he can keep these numbers up, as the best finishers in the world do, but you can't just ignore a season worth of data, especially when the player was 21 when he did it. If you have a special finisher, you want them closer to goal. So centre-forward makes sense. But Martinelli is more than a finisher. There's a reason he gets into those positions, and it's because of a criminally underrated quality of his, the timing of his runs. Take that goal for Brazil. Watch how he remains alive to the situation, stopping and starting to arrive at just the right time for the ball to fall to him and finish. When we talk about instinct as a forward, we tend to put it down to you have it or you don't. But of course, there is a degree of technicality to it. Remaining alive to the situation, present, not just making your usual run or expecting the ball that happened in training. Watch how he checks his run and waits for that initial ball from Vini, then the quick check back as he creates himself some space to fire into before the shot. Similarly, watch how beautifully he puts the fade on his run against Liverpool for the opener at the Emirates last year. Full gas to get in behind, then timing his arrival to meet the pass, not to be too close to the keeper, stays onside, and releases the shot at the exact right time. As I said in my previous video about Saliba, sometimes you have to look at when it's going wrong to appreciate when it's going right. And I'm not bashing the player overall, but a good example when it goes wrong is Lukaku. He's a powerful runner, explosive, especially in his early Premier League years, but so often he'd mistime his run in behind and get caught with the ball too close to the keeper. There's a reason his non-penalty XG conversion into non-penalty goal numbers are often lukewarm, like Lukaku. So Martinelli's got the finishing and timing instinct. But the other thing I like about Martinelli is how sharp he is. He's got the pace and running power, but more importantly, we can see how often he's able to create separation. At the moment, it's from his opposition fullback. Look at the dribbling numbers from the Champions League and ask Sevilla's Juan Lu if he's still having night terrors, and you can see that this is a terrifying prospect to face when he's trying to get an action off 1v1. Translate that into the box, where you only need an inch, and he could explode. The comparison that George Vutsas, a regular contributor on the Different Knocks Patreon and YouTube member side, loves is Luis Suarez, that predatory, instinctual finisher. Running in behind, you can shoot from distance. He's a goal scorer, someone who scores every kind of goal without being a massive presence or a line leader. I love the fact he can shoot off both feet. I think he could develop the ability to rotate wide from a central position like Jesus, and his heading ability has actually always been there. I remember watching the game against Nottingham Forest from the stands in late 2019 when he scored 2, and his first was a brilliant instinctive header from a Callum Chambers cross. In the air, I will always choose movement and body positioning over presence and height, as much as you would want both. And there, the Martinelli project at centre-forward begins to have some question marks, which is where I think we need to introduce some context with Arsenal and the wider world of football. In the Premier League, we're seeing a return to the more traditional number 9. Wenger actually predicted this, by the way, legend, but let's define that quickly. It's a channel runner, the guy who doesn't drop, he remains on the last line as much as possible. The guy who wants to move centre-backs more through physique and athleticism and less through movement outside the box or by dropping. He's a target whose best work comes in the box. They're usually tall, usually very strong, and usually very expensive. In the last few years, what have we seen? Haaland to City, Højlund to United, Isaac to Newcastle, Núñez to Liverpool, Ferguson's emergence at Brighton, Jackson to Chelsea, on and on and on. They all have their own quirks and strengths and weaknesses, but they're all in and around that ballpark of player. Clubs aren't signing the Jesus and Aguero types like they were 5 to 10 years ago. There's a trend here. But that's not happening for no reason. Obviously, no football trend is black and white, but generally speaking, before Pep arrived, the Premier League was a lot more transitional than it is now. You can tell that by looking at the teams that thrived in the mid-2010s, like Pochettino's Spurs, or even that 2016 Leicester team. At that point, where are the defenders generally? For both teams, they're generally higher up the field, meeting one another, battling for the game. But once the more control methods started yielding results for Pep, though, in the later 2010s, teams, especially those who were further down the table, were forced back further from their more transitional mid-blocks into low possession, low blocks to counter it. The higher concentration of men was no longer in the middle of the park against these teams, they were now in the box, with 5 to 15% less possession than they'd had previously against teams who now aimed for more control. Examples of the types of teams this was happening against was later versions of Liverpool and Arsenal more recently, with various results. The false nine is about creating superiorities more in the middle of the park against a couple of defenders. But if you have the whole of Everton standing on the edge of a penalty box, it's a little bit less effective. This season, we've struggled against those types of teams, partly, in my view, because of our lack of a presence to move centre-backs in a different way. There's less need for a false nine, and certainly less functionality, unless it's really working for you, when everyone's now defending in the box, if you're a top team who's likely now aiming for control in this trend. Martinelli is 5'10", and while rapid and has his own outstanding physical qualities, he's not an athletic profile in the mould of an Alexander Isak or Erling Haaland. Now, that's no problem in and of itself. Plenty of the Premier League's great strikers have been below 6 foot or even shorter. But are we hamstringing ourselves to not have our Erling Haaland in this league when the trends are going the way they are? If we go with a Martinelli type at centre forward, are we going to be able to move defenders in a way Haaland can, in the way Isak can? Do we have a target as we come up against more and more low blocks and have to approach the final third in a different way? You could argue maybe we're going against the grain and it's really going to work out for us, but I don't really buy that. Also, just putting my cards on the table, I much prefer that profile of striker, the presence, the line leader. I want a killer, someone who can bully defenders, not necessarily make them think and have to check their shoulder all game. There's also the specifics of Arsenal to consider. Our superstars right now are our wingers. They and our midfielders were our guys who scored our goals last season, and that model was really working. But now, as mentioned, we're facing teams who sit deeper, and we're getting 60 to 70% possession in most of these games against, quote, lower opposition. So now, with the trend set, is it time to move to a different centre-forward model? And is that model Martinelli? Say we did decide to put Martinelli at centre forward and brought in another superstar winger to go left wing, I think we see a drop off in production. The reason Saka, Jesus and Martinelli work so well is Jesus is one of the best facilitative forwards in the world. He's willing to spend more time out of the box than I think Martinelli would be comfortable or best at. He's willing to press in a different way. He's better at knocking it around a corner, doing that inventive work. Martinelli facilitates play well, of course, but it's not the same level as Jesus. The finishing quality improves centrally, but I wonder whether our overall play drops down a level. Surely the answer is to go to the other end of the spectrum. Go for that very different profile of striker who can move defenders physically, battle them, then ask our wingers to do different things in different games. We then have the best of both worlds. Jesus is our facilitator, and then a number 9 who can lead the line. I'm not saying Martinelli at centre forward couldn't work. This is all theoretical. If we move Martinelli centrally and it worked, there'd be no one happier than me. I love the guy, even if I think he's got certain areas of his game to develop. But in theory, I don't see it being a viable long-term solution for Arsenal for him to start there. As always though, from the left wing, our players can spend time centrally. It's not as black and white as he's there or he isn't. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I am kind of excited for this next evolution at Arsenal in the final third. Something is going to have to change in our forward areas soon, whatever you think. We can't live with an injury-prone Jesus, and we're going to have to start giving Saka the superstar treatment at some point, given what he's become. I think that will be an interesting period for Saka, but that's another video. For Martinelli, if it's the beginning of a project or just a one-off, either way, what Mikel does next will be fascinating. If you like The Different Knock and want to see more, you can access our bonus content on Patreon and YouTube memberships for just £3 a month.